Anna is absolutely right that if you focus on women and the young, you can change the world. And we need to change the world of investors because not enough investors are making wise choices. And as a follow-on to the National Financial Capability Study, this past year in 2015, the FINRA Foundation did a supplemental survey of investors. That pool of 27,000 that Anna mentioned included approximately 9,000 people who reported that they had investments outside of a tax-advantaged retirement savings account. In the United States, it's typically a pension plan or a defined contribution plan through an employer, and also an individual retirement account that has tax advantages. And the reason we wanted to look at that particular question is these are the people who are investing very actively. So they're not saving through work only, typically in mutual funds, they're making investor decisions. And we wanted to better understand this population. So the FINRA Foundation did a supplemental survey. And I have a slide on who we are. I'm not going to go into that because we're a little bit short on time. But what we did is we surveyed an additional 2,000 adults of that 9,000. So we can link the data back to the NFCS, as we call it for short, the capability study data, so that we can look at those investors and also see their debt management habits. We can see their financial literacy, and we can gauge their attitudes. But we also asked very specific questions about investing. And what I'd like to do is share, as a sneak preview, some of the results so that you will see what we will be putting out next week. The data is going to be released next week on December 13th. So you are the first people outside of my staff to see this. So here, let's go. So one of the things that we did, I told you there were 2,000 people, and we broke down the sample by demographics so that we could see who is investing. And consistent with the whole financial literacy discussion that Anna just gave, men are more likely to be investing compared with women. Even though women comprise half the sample pool, half the population in the United States, they're far less likely to be investing. We see that older people, people who are over the age of 55, are the largest group of investors. And that's not too surprising because as people deal with their debt, deal with their finances in their younger years, they really get into a key accumulation phase as they hit their 40s and 50s. And so it's not too surprising that those are the folks that are investing. But there's a very large skew toward ethnicity. Whites are much more likely to be investors compared with ethnic minorities in the United States, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and people who have a college education, again, far more likely to be investing. And not surprisingly, as household income goes up, the likelihood that one is an investor goes up. So we wanted to know, too, what people own in these taxable accounts, these accounts outside of their retirement accounts. And it was interesting to see that 74% of households surveyed reported that they owned individual stocks. 64% reported that they owned mutual funds. Now, in retirement accounts, mutual funds are the typical investment. There are opportunities to buy other investments, often the company stock of a company. But to see that 74% had stocks was a very interesting number for us. Individual bonds were held by about a third, 35% of individuals, which was surprising to me. I thought that there would be more people who owned bonds. And a similar number, 33%, have annuities. But far less common were more exotic investments like real estate investments, trusts, options, private placements, structured notes. Exchange-traded funds, somewhat more common, about a fifth of U.S. investors hold those. Commodities and futures, only about 12%. We asked how many people used either an investment advisor or a broker to help them with their decision making. And we found that 56% of the people we surveyed reported using a financial professional, which is good. That means that people are getting help when they need it. And we also asked the reason that they use a financial professional. And the most widely cited reason was to improve investment performance. 81% of our respondents said that they were using a broker or an advisor to improve their portfolio's performance. They also sought professional advice in order to avoid losses. 78% cited that as a reason. About 2/3, 63%, used a professional in order to learn more. So as we think about financial literacy initiatives, we have to be aware that the industry is a very important player in financial education because people look to their professionals in order to understand investments and make wiser decisions. When it came to investor literacy, we had to follow on the financial literacy questions because, as Anna told you, Americans have very low financial literacy. So we dug a little bit deeper and asked 10 questions that were specifically geared toward investing. And some of them were basic understanding, like what is a stock, what is a bond, and we gave definitions that people could choose from. And about 3/4 of people got those questions right. Now remember, these are people that are investors. This is a targeted sample of investors, but only 3/4 could tell us when we gave them choices what a stock was. And slightly fewer were able to tell us what a bond was. We asked about short selling, we asked about risk, we asked a number of topics. And what we saw is that in the US, consistent with financial literacy questions, investor literacy is extremely low. On average, the people that we surveyed could get only 4.4 questions right. That's failing. That's 40%. That's not good. So we need to do more to help investors understand what they're doing when they're investing, because in order to grow our capital markets and to make sure that people weather financial crises like the one that happened in 2008, they need to understand these basic concepts of investing. And one of the things that was concerning to me, and it won't be surprising to Anna, is that women performed worse on the quiz than men did. They, on average, got one fewer question correct than men did. But what's fascinating is that the same number across the genders got the same number of questions wrong, an average of 3.4 questions wrong. But women were far more likely to answer questions that they don't know. So the balance of questions, women would say, we don't know. And that argues, that supports the concept of let's get investor education to women. They're willing to say that they don't know. And let's hope that that means they're willing to learn. They're willing to be educated. Some of the other findings that the report will go into include understanding of fees. In the United States, we have different fee structures, and it can be very confusing. A great deal of the policy, the changes that have happened, particularly with respect to retirement planning, have curtailed to some extent commission-based fee structures in retirement accounts, and that's something that we wanted to gauge whether people understand. Generally, people understand that they're paying fees for investments, but they don't quite understand how. And they don't necessarily talk to their investment professionals about how the professional is getting compensated. We asked about attitudes toward investing. How do people believe the market will perform in the future? And not too surprisingly, 40% of people think that the market will be between 5 and 10% return annually. Some people are a little bit more optimistic, but that whole early 2000, the market's going to return 33% days appear to be gone. We asked about disclosure as well, because one of the reasons that I was so excited and honored to be asked to speak here is that we are trying to use behavioral insights in our policy making. So when we make rules, when we issue guidance, we use behavioral insights as best we can, and we test disclosures to the extent that we can before we require that they be used. And so we wanted to see whether investors understand disclosures, whether they use disclosures. Most people claim that they read their disclosures, but it was a relatively low amount who said that they thoroughly read and really ask questions about the disclosure that they had. We asked about information sources. People turn to family, people turn to professionals. We also explored different websites that they use. And we did look at some of the demographic distinctions, and consistent with the findings in the National Financial Capability Study, there were some differences across generations. I shared already the knowledge with women, but with the generations among investors between the ages of 18 and 34, nearly 4 in 10 have used some automated investment tool, like a robo-advisor, but only 4% of those who are over the age of 55. And 58% of investors between 18 and 34 had heard of equity crowdfunding, compared with only 43% for the 35 to 54 group and 22% for those that were over the age of 55. So the data are available or will be available come December 13th. We encourage you to use them. One of the principles that the foundation has really operated on is to make not only the results of the survey available, but the questions that we ask and the underlying data available so that people, researchers, policymakers can download and use the data. So on the cards, on the Financial Capability website, you're able to access all of that if as a researcher or someone involved in policy, someone interested in data like Anna and I are. It's available to you. So with that, thank you very much.